On the 28th of October, the sky over southeastern Ohio was one flat sheet of pewter, and the sycamores along County Road 14 had already given up their leaves. The morning was still and colorless, the kind of overcast autumn day that makes the far hills look drawn in pencil. At the edge of a dilapidated barn, a woman in a dark blue quilted vest was driving a wooden stake into cold ground with a rubber mallet. She was 68 years old. Her hair was long and grey and pulled back in a low knot at the nape of her neck. On the sign nailed to the stake, in red hand lettering she had done herself the night before at her kitchen table, were the words, "For sale by owner," and 65 acres. Underneath those words was a phone number that rang to a prepaid burner phone she had bought in Athens, for $42. She stepped back from the stake and tested it with a gloved hand. It did not wobble. She braced a clipboard against her hip and uncapped a pen. Behind her, an old green Plano tackle box sat on the porch of the barn, though she did not look at it. In the bed of a 1998 Ford F-150 parked 10 yards away, an 11-year-old blue-tick coonhound named Buster sat arthritic and grey-muzzled, watching her with patient yellow eyes. He was too stiff to jump down on his own, and she would lift him down when she was finished. She was not finished yet. Margaret Halloway had never in her life put anything up for sale that she actually wanted to sell. Not the crib after the miscarriage in 1979. Not Ray's truck. Not the 65 acres she was now, on the 28th of October, pretending to want gone. On the clipboard braced against her hip were 3 columns in her small, careful handwriting. Column 1 was labeled, "Who Might Come." Column 2 was labeled, "What They Will Say." Column 3, the widest, the one she had not filled in yet, was labeled, "What They Will Do." What she had not written on the clipboard, what she had already done, was this. 6 trail cameras were already zip-tied to trees in a ring around the property. Bushnell Core DS models, cellular-enabled, ordered from a sporting goods store in West Virginia so no local delivery driver saw the box. Their lenses were angled with methodical care at 6 points of interest on the land. Camera 1 watched the gate. Camera 2 watched the road. Camera 3 watched the barn door. Camera 4 watched the pond. Camera 5 watched the ridge. And Camera 6, the important one, was angled from a hollow in a tulip poplar, directly at a capped 4-inch steel pipe rising out of the dirt behind the ridge, an old drill site none of the neighbors knew about. She had buried Ray in May. It was now late October. In between, she had learned 3 things she was not supposed to know. The first she had learned from a letter he left in a tackle box. The second she had learned from a stranger's voice at a diner counter. The third she had not learned yet, but she had built the trap that would teach her. In a year, this land would either be a headline or it would be a hole she had dug for herself. She did not yet know which. Everyone in Millfield, Ohio, thought they knew Maggie Halloway. 32 years behind the counter at the county records office. Quiet, careful, a little slow, some of the younger clerks whispered. Since Ray had passed, a widow with 65 acres, she couldn't possibly manage. An easy sale, if the price was right and the paperwork was friendly. That was the version of her they had drawn. That was the version she was going to let them buy. But to understand the sign at the gate, you have to understand the tackle box. And to understand the tackle box, you have to go back to a Tuesday in May, when a man named Raymond Halloway drove out to a fence line he had not told his wife about, and never came home. Ray Halloway, 71 years old, was a retired maintenance supervisor for the county highway department. On the morning of Tuesday, May 14th, he went out with a fence stretcher in the bed of his 1998 Ford F-150 and did not say where he was going. He said only what he always said. Back before supper, Mags. At 3:47 that afternoon, a farmer named Curtis Doyle was driving south on County Road 14 when he saw a truck idling in a pull-off and a man face down in the grass beside a rusted gate. The paramedics called it a myocardial infarction. Massive, instant. The young medic told Maggie in the hallway of O'Bellness Memorial Hospital that her husband had not suffered, as if that were the point. The Halloways lived in a small white house on Elm Street, in Millfield, half a mile from the diner. Ray had a truck, a shed, a dog, and Maggie. They had been married 43 years. They had never had children after the miscarriage. Ray fished. Ray drank one Rolling Rock on Sunday. Ray voted in every off-year election. Ray was not the kind of man who kept secrets. That was what Maggie thought, and that was what made the tackle box worse. For 6 weeks she did not go into his shed. She could not. When she finally did, on the last day of June, it was to look for the extra key to the safe deposit box, because the estate lawyer had asked her twice. She did not find the key. She found the tackle box. It was an old green Plano box with 3 trays, bass jigs, a spool of 8-pound test line, a broken pair of pliers he had said for 11 years he would replace. Under the bottom tray she noticed a false floor. She only noticed it because one corner was lifted a 1/4 inch, which was not how Ray left things. Ray was a man who squared his corners. Underneath the false floor was a folded manila envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 sheets of lined notebook paper. Inside the sheets, in his blocky pencil handwriting, was a letter dated April 3rd. She unfolded it at the kitchen table, under the overhead light, and began to read. Mags, if you are reading this, it is because I did not get around to telling you the thing I have been chewing on since March, and I am sorry for that. There is a piece of ground out on 14 that came to me from Uncle Denton back in '98, and I never much bothered you with it because it never much mattered. It matters now. A man named Ted Marsh has been out to see me twice. He wants it. He does not want it the way a man wants a piece of hunting ground. He wants it the way a man wants something under it. I have been reading up on what is under it. I do not like what I have found. If something happens to me before I can walk you out there and show you, I need you to do 3 things. Do not sell it. Do not trust anyone in town about it. And go look at the drill site by the ridge. She read the letter 3 times. She sat at the kitchen table until the light in the window turned the color of weak tea. She did not cry, she had done the crying already. And this was a different animal. This was a letter from a man who had known something was wrong, and had hidden what he knew in a tackle box because he was afraid. Ray had been afraid. Ray, who was never afraid of anything, had written the word, "If something happens to me," in pencil on lined paper, and folded it into a false bottom. The next morning she drove out to County Road 14. She found the gate. She found the fence Ray had been mending, the wire still stretched and half-fastened, a post-hole digger leaning against the last post he set. She walked past it to the ridge, pushing through a stand of sumac whose stems were bare and grey. Behind the sumac she found the drill site, a capped 4-inch steel pipe rising 18 inches out of the dirt, its collar stamped with a serial number and a date, 09/11/23, September of the previous year. Ray had been dead 5 months. The drill was 7 months old. Someone had drilled a test well on her husband's land while he was still alive, and Ray had not paid for it. The pipe was not in Ray's handwriting, not in Ray's name, not in any record Ray had ever shown her. She went home and did what a 32-year records clerk does. She pulled the plat map for the parcel. She pulled the tax record. She pulled the deed. The property was assessed at $47,000. She knew what that ground was worth per acre in Athens County, and $47,000 was not it. The soil was good. The pond was spring-fed. The ridge timber was marketable hardwood. 65 acres at market should have appraised at something closer to $130,000. Someone had shaved $83,000 off the value of her husband's land in the county books. She could have gone to the sheriff. She almost did. She got as far as her coat and her purse and the pickup keys, and then she stopped in the mudroom and put the keys back on the hook. Ray had written, "Do not trust anyone in town." Ray had never told her not to trust anyone in his life. If Ray had written it down in pencil in a letter he hid in a tackle box, Ray had a reason. She was not going to spend that reason on a phone call to a man she went to high school with. The contradiction sat in her like a cold stone. She loved this town. She had loved this town for 68 years. She had been the county records clerk for 32 of those years, cross-referencing deeds and tax rolls and plat maps, until she could spot a fraudulent easement in 10 minutes. She knew every corner of every parcel in Athens County. She knew which families owned what, and who had sold to whom and where the lines were drawn. Setting a trap for this town felt like setting a trap for herself. She built the ruse in 7 steps. First, the sign. She would put a for sale by owner sign at the gate. Not a realtor. Realtors keep records. She wanted the offer to come to her in the open, so she could see the shape of the hand that reached for it. Second, the cameras. 6 Bushnell Core DS trail cameras, cellular enabled, $189 each, ordered from a Cabela's in West Virginia. Legal, because these were her own 65 acres. And trail cameras on private property are lawful in Ohio without notice, so long as they capture only what happens on the land itself. She sighted them at the gate, the barn, the pond, the ridge, the fence line, and the 6th, the important one angled from a hollow in a tulip poplar directly at the capped drill site. Third, the burner, a prepaid phone from a Dollar General in Nelsonville, 26 miles south, so no clerk in Millfield saw her buy it. New number on the sign. Fourth, the post office box. Rented at the Nelsonville post office under her maiden name, Margaret Renfro, for any offer that came in writing. Fifth, the persona. She would go to the diner 3 mornings a week. She would let people ask about the sign. She would look tired. She would say things like, "I just want to be done with it," and Ray would have known what to do with it. I don't. She would not lie outright. She would let people fill in the lie themselves. That was cheaper and more durable. Sixth, the clipboard. Every evening she would sit at the kitchen table and log in 3 columns, in her small, careful handwriting, everything she saw and heard. Column 1, who. Column 2, what they said. Column 3, what they did. 7th, the timeline. 1 year, October 28th to October 28th. If in 1 year the trap had caught nothing, she would give the whole thing to the sheriff and be a fool in peace. On the 27th of October, she cleaned the kitchen. On the 28th, she drove out to the gate at 7 in the morning with a wooden stake, a rubber mallet, a red hand-painted sign, and a blue-tick coonhound too arthritic to jump down from the truck bed on his own. She lifted him down. She staked the sign. She walked the fence line and checked each camera, 1 through 6. And then she stood at the gate for a long time and looked at the barn, and at the ridge behind it, and at the sky. And she said out loud, so only Buster could hear, "All right, Raymond, let's see who comes." Days 1 through 6 after the sign went up had the texture of a small town noticing. On day 1, 3 cars slowed down and drove on. On day 2, a young man in a Carhartt jacket pulled into the pull-off, got out, walked to the gate, took a photograph of the sign on his phone, and drove away. Camera 1 caught him. Maggie logged him in column 1 on her clipboard. Young, 20s, blue truck, plates end in 4RJ7. She moved on. On day 3 she went to Dot's Diner on Main Street. She sat at the counter. She ordered the 2-egg breakfast with sausage, no toast. Dot's daughter Kimmy, 42 years old, worked the register, and Kimmy was the switchboard of Millfield. Whatever Kimmy heard by 8 in the morning was common knowledge by noon, Kimmy said. Saw a sign out on 14 yesterday. That your ground? Maggie, tired, quiet, said, raise. Was raise. Kimmy said, you selling? Maggie said, I don't know what else to do with it. I don't know a thing about that ground, honey. Ray never even took me out there. Kimmy said, you want some coffee? Maggie said, please. That was it. 9 words of confession, engineered. By noon, the whole town would know that the widow Halloway had inherited a piece of ground she knew nothing about and wanted rid of. The fact that it was true she knew nothing about the ground, and the lie that she wanted rid of it, would travel the same wire at the same speed. On day 4, the burner phone rang for the first time. Number blocked. A man's voice, warm and easy. Mrs. Halloway? Ted Marsh. I'm a development consultant here in the county. I heard you might have some acreage you're looking to move. I wondered if I could come out and take a look. She let a beat go by. She let her voice sound the way an old woman's voice sounds when it does not know what to do. That would be all right. Tomorrow? Tomorrow's fine. Say 10 o'clock. She hung up. She wrote in column 2, Ted Marsh. Development consultant. Wants to come tomorrow. In column 3 she wrote nothing yet. Column 3 was only for what they did. Day 5, 10 o'clock. Ted Marsh's dark grey Silverado pulled up at the gate. Marsh was 61, silver-haired, wore a sport coat over a polo, the kind of man who calls every woman ma'am and every man chief. Camera 1 was running. Maggie had told him she would meet him at the gate. Buster was on the porch of the farmhouse across the property, too far to bark. They walked the fence line together. Marsh pointed out where the pond drained, where the barn was failing, where the northeast corner was just briar and would be a pain to clear. He talked about the market. He talked about how nobody buys ground like this anymore, how it's a shame, how it costs more to hold on to than to sell. Maggie nodded. Maggie said nothing. Maggie had decided she would say almost nothing today. This part of the test was not what he said at the gate. It was what he did after he left. At 11:18 he shook her hand, told her he'd be in touch, and drove off. Camera 1 logged him out. That same afternoon Maggie drove to Athens, 12 miles away, and pulled 2 records at the county courthouse. Public, anyone could see them. The first was the formation of LLC filing for Blue Line Holdings LLC, registered agent Ted Marsh, filed in March of 2021. The second was the deed transfer history for a property she remembered Ray mentioning once, the old Whitcomb place. An 80-year-old widow named Ellen Whitcomb, who lived alone on 40 acres north of Chauncey, sold in 2022 to Blue Line Holdings for $31,000. Maggie pulled the assessor's card. Assessed value at time of sale, $31,500. Signed by Deputy Assessor Darrell Coombs. She pulled the next one, a property near Trimble. Widow, 73. Sold to Blue Line for $42,000. Assessed at $42,300. Signed Coombs. She pulled 2 more before the courthouse closed. Same pattern, same assessor, same buyer, same shape of hand reaching for the same shape of thing. She went home. She wrote in column 3 for the first time in ink. Marsh has done this 6 times. 6 women. The anomaly came that night at 2:14 in the morning. Buster got up from the porch and started barking at the road. Maggie woke in her nightgown and pulled back the curtain. Nothing there. Buster stopped barking after a minute and lay back down. The next morning she checked camera 4, the fence line camera nearest the road. Between 2:11 and 2:16 a.m., a vehicle had passed slowly, headlights off, on County Road 14. She could not see the vehicle. She could see, in the infrared glow, the outline of a truck with a rack of some kind on the roof, the profile of a well drilling rig. It slowed to a crawl at her gate. It idled for 41 seconds. Then it moved on. Nobody drills at 2 in the morning. Nobody drives without headlights unless they don't want to be seen. She could have called the sheriff. She could have. Instead, she went out to the shed and got Ray's fishing tackle box down from the shelf and took out the manila envelope and read the letter for the 17th time. They will come at night, before they come in the daylight. That is how you'll know they are not just curious. If you see the ones who come at night, do not go outside. Watch them from the window and write down what they do. A curious man knocks. A crooked man circles. On the morning of the 7th day, the post office box in Nelsonville had its first letter. It was a formal offer from Blue Line Holdings LLC. $52,000, cash, close in 30 days, as is, no contingencies. Signed Theodore R. Marsh, managing member. Enclosed, a purchase agreement, 3 tabbed signature lines, a self-addressed stamped envelope. $52,000 for 65 acres of hill country, with a pond, a barn, and unbeknownst to Blue Line, a woman who spent 3 decades reading exactly this kind of paperwork. Maggie opened it at her kitchen table and allowed herself one slow, small smile. She did not respond. She let a week pass. She wanted to see what happened in silence. On day 14, at Dot's Diner, she sat in the back booth for the first time. She usually took the counter. She chose the back booth because it backed onto the booth against the far wall, and the wall was only lath and plaster and cheap paneling, and voices carry. At 8:52 in the morning, 2 men slid into the far booth. She recognized the first voice at once. Ted Marsh, The second she did not know. Older. A wheeze in the vowels. Marsh said, "Sent it Monday." Should have heard by now. The second voice said, "She's slow." Kimmy said she barely remembers her own phone number. Marsh said, 52 is generous. Book value's 47. The second voice said, "And the aquifer numbers?" Marsh, lower said. Bo pulled a sample in September. "It's better than the Whitcomb place. Cleaner." The second voice said, "Jesus." Marsh said, "Yeah." A pause. The sound of coffee. The second voice said, "You sure Ray didn't tell her?" Marsh said, "If he'd told her, she'd have called the sheriff by now. She hasn't called anybody. She's just sitting there." The second voice said, "Push it. Get it done before winter." The waitress came over. The conversation stopped. When the waitress left, they talked about a truck for sale in Logan. She did not turn her head. She did not look. She counted 7 breaths and finished her toast and paid at the counter and drove home the long way because she needed the extra 6 minutes to steady her hands on the wheel. There is a man named Ted Marsh, and there is at least one other man with him. I do not know how many altogether. I know they think they are careful. Careful men talk in the same booth at the same diner every Wednesday, and they think the walls are thick. The walls are not thick. Ray had written this. Ray had known about the booth. Ray had sat in that same back booth. He must have. That was how he had learned in the first place. Marsh had said the name Bo. She wrote it in column 2. And she wrote a question in column 3. Bo who? She would find out. But first, she had to answer the offer. And her answer was going to be the most delicate lie of her life. She sent back a signed counteroffer, asking for $68,000. The number was designed to fail. She wanted Marsh to come back to her. She wanted him in her kitchen. Days 25 through 51 passed in 2 weeks of nothing. The trap had been laid, and now it needed to breathe. Marsh received the counter. He called, warm, disappointed. He offered 55. She said she'd think about it. She did not sign. On the night of the 12th of November, camera 6, the one in the tulip poplar over the drill site, triggered at 11:47 p.m. At 11:47, a white Ford F350 came slowly up the 2-track, past the ridge with its headlights off. It stopped 10 yards from the capped pipe. 2 men got out. The first was a tall, thin man in a Carhartt jacket and a headlamp. The second was shorter, heavier, with a beard. The tall man carried a canvas bag and a torque wrench. The short man carried a plastic sample jar and a clipboard. At 11:51, the tall man uncapped the pipe. He did it with a socket wrench and a specific fluency. This was not the first time he had opened this well. At 11:54, the short man lowered a weighted tube on a string. He drew a water sample. He capped it. He labeled it with a Sharpie. On the label, though the camera could not read it, Maggie later confirmed on the print, enhanced with a magnifying glass at her kitchen table, the words, Halloway 3, and the date, Halloway 3. This was the 3rd time. At 12:06 they recapped the pipe. They did not lock it. They swept the ground with their boots to disturb the tread marks. They got back in the F350 and drove out the way they had come, headlights still off until they reached the road. The footage was 38 minutes long. Maggie watched it twice, standing in her kitchen with the laptop on the counter, in her nightgown and a cardigan, at 6 in the morning after the camera pushed the clip to her phone. Buster was at her feet. Buster did not know what he was looking at. Maggie did. She went back to the courthouse. She pulled well drilling permits in Athens County for the past 3 years, filtered by driller. She found a name, Redfern, Bo. Bo's Well and Pump Service, Chauncey, Ohio. Attached to 9 test well permits in the past 30 months, all on properties later sold to Blue Line. 9, including one at the Whitcomb place, one at the Trimble parcel, and one at a farm outside Amesville whose owner had died the previous January. Died. The Amesville owner had died. Suddenly. In his own driveway. A stroke, the paper had said. If you find a pattern, do not tell it to anybody in the county. Take it to Columbus. There is a woman at the Attorney General's office named Diane Bricker, in the Consumer Protection Division. I met her at the fair the year they had the tent about elder fraud. She has an honest face. If you show her what you have found, she will know what to do with it." Ray had written it down. Ray had already picked the person. Ray had, in April, 6 weeks before he died, done the small careful thing of writing down the name of a woman at the Attorney General's office in a letter he hid in a tackle box, in case. Maggie did not go to Columbus yet. She wanted one more piece. She wanted the paper trail from the inside of the assessor's office. She wanted proof that Coombs was not incompetent. Proof that he was complicit. For that, she needed help from someone who worked in that office. And she had, in 32 years, made exactly one friend there young enough and honest enough to help. She was 24 years old. Her name was Janelle. Days 52 through 78. Maggie met Janelle Ruiz for coffee at a coffee shop in Athens. Neutral ground, not Millfield. Janelle was 24, hired 8 months earlier as a junior clerk in the assessor's office. She had a degree in public administration from Ohio University, was engaged to a corrections officer, and had been unhappy for 4 months without knowing how to name why. Maggie did not tell Janelle everything at first. She asked about Coombs. She asked how appraisals were assigned. She asked who reviews them. She let Janelle talk, and Janelle after a while talked. Janelle said, "There's a folder on his desktop called Priority. It's supposed to be a workflow thing. Properties that are backed up or need a relook. But the properties in it don't get looked at again. They just get an appraisal in a range he's already written down in the notes field. I asked him about it once, and he said it was because those owners had asked for informal reviews. But I looked, and none of them had. I know because I'm the one who processes review requests." Janelle paused. She said, I counted last month, there are 14 properties in that folder, all of them owned by people over 65. 11 of them are widows. I don't know what to do. I'm 24. He's the deputy assessor. My fiancé keeps saying just keep your head down. Maggie told Janelle a version of the truth. Not all of it. Not the cameras, not Ray. She told her that she had reason to think one of those 14 properties was her own late husband's, and she told her the offer she had received. She asked Janelle if there was a way to see the notes field on her own property. Janelle could. Janelle did. 2 days later they met again in the same coffee shop, and Janelle slid a printed screenshot across the table. Halloway parcel, 65.0 acres, County Road 14. Under notes, in the field only assessor staff could see. Target range 45 to 52K. Hold on any reassessment. Per DC start TM. Dated 7 months before Ray died. Per DC/TM. Gerald Coombs. Ted Marsh. Coombs had been holding the appraisal artificially low on Ray's land 7 months before Ray died, which meant Marsh had known about the aquifer and had targeted Ray's land before Ray had ever met him. Maggie's face at the coffee shop did not change. Not tears. Just a long, slow breath, and a nod, and a thank you, honey. You did the right thing. There will be a young person somewhere in this who is scared and not sure who to trust. If they help you, protect them. Do not let them take the fall for it. Their whole life is still in front of them, and ours has already mostly been. Ray again had known. Ray again had seen the shape of it before Maggie ever did. She recognized this as an ache and a comfort at once. She told Janelle to go to work Monday, do her job, say nothing, change nothing. And she told her that in 90 days she would be able to explain everything. Janelle agreed. Janelle also, quietly without being asked, saved a copy of the priority folder to a personal flash drive. On the drive home, Maggie stopped at the pull-off on County Road 14, the one where Curtis Doyle had found Ray. She sat in her truck for 20 minutes with the engine off and the windows down. And for the first time since May, she said out loud what she had been afraid to say even to herself. Did they kill you, Raymond, or were you just unlucky? Before Maggie sat down at that kitchen table with Ted Marsh and a plate of molasses cookies, she did one more thing. She took the letter out of the tackle box, and she read the last part of it, the part she had not let herself read yet. If you are watching this story unfold and something in it feels familiar, a widow you know, A piece of ground someone is too eager to buy. An old man who died on a fence line and left a letter in a tackle box. Subscribe and stay with us. Because what she read on that page was the part that told her she was not going to be able to walk away. You have watched her build the trap for 6 months. The threatening call is coming. She could give the evidence to the sheriff tomorrow morning and be done. Would you? Or would you finish what Ray started? Days 79 through 168. Late winter into early spring. Maggie had now been on the trap for more than 3 months. She let Marsh come back to her. She agreed to a meeting at her kitchen table. She told him she thought she was ready to sell, but she wanted to understand the paperwork. Marsh arrived at the kitchen table with a folder, coffee, a plate of Maggie's molasses cookies she baked that morning because it fit the persona, Buster on the porch, and on the shelf above the refrigerator, angled down through the slats of a wicker basket, the 6th trail camera, brought inside for this, running. Ohio is a one-party consent state. She was legally allowed to record any conversation she was a participant in. The law was on her side, and she had been on the side of the law for 32 years. She let Marsh walk her through the offer. She asked small, confused questions. She asked about the aquifer. She asked it artlessly. Ted, someone at the diner, said something about water. I don't know what they meant. Is there something about water on this ground I should know about before I sign? Marsh blinked. He drank his coffee. He said, Careful. Well, Maggie, there's water under most ground in this county. That's not unusual. Wouldn't affect the sale price, she said. So there's not any commercial water on that ground? He said, No, ma'am. Nothing commercial. Just standard residential aquifer, if that. The lie was complete. On camera, on tape, in her own kitchen. She let him leave without signing. She told him she needed 1 more week. She called him 3 days later on the burner phone. And this call, too, was recorded. A small digital recorder from an electronics store in Athens. $38, plugged in line with the phone. She goaded him, gently, in the character of a woman who was starting to worry she was being cheated by her nephew's advice. She said her nephew told her the land might be worth more. She said she didn't know. Marsh, impatient now, the winter had been long and the bottling contractor's deadline was April, said something he should not, Marsh said. Maggie, look, your nephew doesn't know this ground. I do. I've been on it more times than you have. There's nothing under there worth more than what I'm offering. Trust me, Maggie said. You've been on it more times than me. Marsh, catching himself, said, I've walked it, is all. When we walked it in October, Maggie said, Oh, all right, yes, I remember. The pause was on tape. 3 seconds of Marsh recovering. It was worse than a confession. A jury would hear those 3 seconds and know. You will get 1 moment when they slip. It will be small. Do not react to it. Let it go by like a leaf on the water. Then, when they cannot see, pick it up. Maggie's hand was very steady as she ended the call, saved the file, backed it up to 2 separate USB drives, and put 1 drive in a coffee can in the freezer. The bigger truth was now complete. She had courthouse records showing the pattern of undervaluation. She had trail camera footage of unauthorized well sampling. She had Janelle's screenshot of the priority folder. She had 2 recordings of Marsh, 1 visual, 1 audio, of him lying and slipping. And she had Ray's letter, which was not evidence in a courtroom, but was evidence in her heart. On the 18th of April, the burner phone rang from a blocked number. Not Marsh, not Coombs. A voice she had never heard before, low and level. Mrs. Halloway, we know about the cameras. Take the sign down. Take the offer. This is the only warning you will get. The threatening call on April 18th changed the register of the story. Someone knew about the cameras, which meant someone had been on her property closer than she saw, or someone in the county had been watching her the way she had been watching them. Her first assumption was that it was Marsh. Panicking, she checked the 6-camera log. She went back through every clip in the archive since November. On March 29th, at 4:11 in the afternoon, a man she had not yet identified walked the fence line near camera 2. He looked up. He looked directly at the camera. He knew exactly where it was. He walked past it. She printed the still. She studied it. The next week, Janelle quietly pulled DMV photos at Maggie's request and matched the face. Beau Redfern, 48, the well driller. Redfern had been on her land in daylight, alone, and had scouted her surveillance. The scheme, which had been a shape in the dark, was now a shape on the back of an envelope at her kitchen table, drawn in Maggie's own small, careful handwriting. Blue Line Holdings LLC, fronted by Ted Marsh, was under contract to a Columbus-based water bottling company to deliver water rights on at least 12 parcels above the shallow Wayne Formation aquifer by June. Beau Redfern, on Blue Line's payroll off the books, had been drilling small test wells at night on those parcels, some with the owner's knowledge, most without, and sampling water quality and yield. Daryl Coombs, deputy assessor, had been flagging targeted parcels in a priority folder and rigging appraisals low so Blue Line could buy them for a fraction of market value. When an owner would not sell or was about to figure out what was happening, Blue Line found another way. Pressure, harassment, and Maggie now suspected in at least one case. Worse, Ray Halloway, on the day he died, was on his 65 acres because he had gone out to look at the drill site. He had figured it out. He had been about to go to Columbus. He never made it home. The slow, terrible arithmetic of it sat in Maggie's chest. Ray had a heart, and his heart failed, and there was no autopsy report, and no evidence of foul play. She could not prove they killed him. She may never be able to. But she could prove the rest, and if she proved the rest, someone else in Columbus might be able to look at Ray's death again. 6 days after the call, Buster was poisoned, not fatally. Maggie found him on the porch at 6 in the morning with foam at the mouth, unable to stand. She drove him to the vet in Athens, 60 miles an hour, with the emergency flashers on and her hands white on the wheel. The vet, a woman named Dr. Prieto, induced vomiting and pumped activated charcoal. Buster survived. In his vomit there were traces of what the vet called, carefully, a rodenticide, most likely bromadiolone, delivered in something like a piece of raw hamburger. Someone had thrown a poisoned burger into the yard. Maggie sat on the vet clinic floor for an hour with her arms around the dog's neck, and she cried for the first time since Ray died, and when she stopped crying she was not the same woman who had walked in. The stakes were now personal, physical and immediate. The bottling contractor's June 30th deadline for water rights delivery. Blue Line was 6 parcels short. Maggie's 65 acres were the largest of the 6. Whoever poisoned Buster was willing to escalate. Beau Redfern, most likely. Working alone or on Marsh's word. Maggie had enough evidence for the Attorney General. But if she took it to Diane Bricker today, the case takes months to build. Meanwhile, she was alone in a farmhouse on Elm Street, with a dog too old to run, and Janelle Ruiz still worked in the assessor's office. If Coombs realized she was helping Maggie, Janelle loses her job at best and her safety at worst. On the evening of April 25th, Maggie was in the kitchen making chicken and dumplings, because chicken and dumplings was what her mother had made in bad times, and her mother had never been wrong about that. Buster was asleep on the rug beside the stove, still a little unsteady on his hind legs. Outside, headlights swept the front window. She looked up. The headlights did not pass. They stopped at the end of her driveway. They stayed there for 2 minutes. And then, without a car door ever opening, they backed slowly out onto Elm Street and drove away. Maggie turned off the burner under the pot. She walked to the closet in the hall. She took down the .22 rifle Ray had used for groundhogs, the one she had not touched in 19 years. She loaded it. She set it against the wall by the back door, and she went back to the kitchen and finished the dumplings, because she was not going to let them stop her from eating supper in her own house. That night she called Janelle and told her, at last, everything. Janelle's response was steady, frightened, resolute. "Tell me what you need me to do." On May 3rd, Maggie drove to the Ohio Attorney General's office in Columbus, 72 miles north. She had an appointment with Diane Bricker's assistant. She brought a manila folder labeled in her small, careful handwriting, Halloway. Inside the folder, a printout of every trail camera clip catalogue, transcripts of both recordings, Janelle's screenshot of the priority folder, the courthouse deed comparison chart she had built for 8 Blue Line purchases, a copy of Ray's letter, photocopied with the original staying in the coffee can in her freezer, and a 2-page summary in her own hand. Diane Bricker met with her personally. Mrs. Halloway, I am going to ask you a hard question. Do you understand that what you have here, if it holds, is the kind of case that is going to make some people in your county extremely angry with you, extremely publicly for a long time? Do you understand that? Maggie said. Yes, ma'am, Bricker said. And are you willing to be a witness? Maggie said. That's what I drove up here for. Bricker's office coordinated with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. A BCI agent would pose as Maggie's nephew from Cleveland, an accountant, come to help her with the sale. Marsh would be invited back to the kitchen table for a final walkthrough. The kitchen would be wired this time by the state, not by Maggie's recorder. Marsh would be given every opportunity to admit, on the record, the scheme he already admitted in less formal ways. Coombs was already under separate surveillance based on Janelle's information. The date was set for May 22nd, 1 year and 8 days after Ray died on a fence line. Not a coincidence. Maggie asked Bricker to schedule it that way. Bricker did. From May 3rd to May 22nd, Maggie had to live in a farmhouse on Elm Street, with the point 22 by the door, and a blue-tick coonhound on the rug, and a plan she could not tell anyone about. She watered the tomato plants Ray planted the year before. She washed and re-washed the same coffee mug. She sat at the kitchen table each night and read Ray's letter, though she had memorized it, though she could recite it in her sleep. On the 22nd of May, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Ted Marsh's dark grey Silverado pulled up to the curb on Elm Street. He got out with his folder and his sport coat and his easy walk, and he came up the porch steps, and he knocked on Maggie Halloway's front door. And Maggie Halloway, in a dark blue quilted vest over a dark grey long-sleeved shirt, opened the door and smiled at him the way she had smiled at him at the gate 7 months earlier. And she said, "Come on in, Ted. My nephew's here from Cleveland. He's going to sit in." Marsh was at the kitchen table. The folder. Coffee. Molasses cookies. The BCI agent, mid-40s, glasses, calling himself Mark Renfro, playing the accountant nephew with genuinely impressive quiet, was at Maggie's right hand. On the counter, a small wire recorder disguised as a smoke detector. Under the table, another. The recorder in the wicker basket above the refrigerator, still there, still on, though it was now insurance rather than principal evidence. Marsh walked through the final offer, $55,500, cash, close in 10 days. He was chatty. He was confident. Winter was over, and his deadline was close. And this was the last big parcel. And he had done this 14 times, and it had always worked. The nephew asked the questions Maggie had spent 7 months writing on her clipboard. He asked them casually, like an accountant. He asked about the water. He asked about the assessment. He asked whether Blue Line had any relationship with any water bottling contract. He asked whether the deputy assessor had any interest in the LLC. Marsh lied. He lied about the water. He lied about the assessor. He lied about the drill site. He said, on tape, on video, in a state one-party jurisdiction with a state agent present under color of law, "There's nothing under this ground worth more than what I'm offering, and nobody in the county government has anything to gain from this sale." There is a knock at the front door. Maggie stands up. She walks to the door. She opens it. And 2 agents of the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, in windbreakers, badges out, step into her front hall. Marsh looks up. Marsh sets down his coffee. Marsh's face does something complicated. He looks at Maggie. He says, very quiet, "You." Maggie sits back down at her own table. She folds her hands. She says, "Yes, Ted. Me." Coombs was arrested at his desk in Athens at 10:47 the same morning. Redfern was arrested at his shop in Chauncey at 11:02. That evening, after the agents had left, after Janelle had called crying, after the phone had rung 9 times with reporters, and Maggie had answered none of them, Maggie sat at her kitchen table with a mug of tea gone cold and Buster's head on her foot. She took the letter out of the tackle box for the last time. She read the last page. She had known it by heart for months. She read it anyway because reading is different from remembering. "Mags, I know you. I know you will read this, and you will do it right. You will not go off half-cocked, and you will not sit on it either. You will do what I did not have time to do, which is figure it out and take it where it needs to go. Do not do it because I asked you to. Do it because it is the right thing. I have loved you since we were 16 years old at the Fairfield County Fair. And I will love you when I am gone, and I will love you in every place where love is possible after that. If someone comes for the 65, Maggie, don't ask them what they want. Watch what they do when they think you don't know. Ray. She folded the letter along its old creases. She put it back in the manila envelope. She put the envelope back in the false bottom of the tackle box. She closed the lid. She sat for a long time with her hand on the lid, and then she got up and she washed her tea mug. Because a mug does not clean itself, and grief does not do dishes. Ted Marsh was indicted the following August on 14 counts including grand theft, forgery, engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity, and conspiracy. Denied bail on the second count, went to trial in late spring. Convicted on 11 counts, sentenced to 8 years. Daryl Coombs pled to 2 counts within 6 weeks. Bribery and tampering with records. Cooperated. Sentenced to 3 years, of which he served 18 months. Lost his pension. Bo Redfern pled early. Cooperated fully. Testified against both. Sentenced to 2 years. Released in 14 months, on the condition that he never again drill a well in the state of Ohio. He came to Maggie's house the week before his sentencing hearing, without invitation, and stood on her porch and said, "Quiet, I didn't know about your dog. I want you to know I didn't do that one. That was Marsh's cousin from Nelsonville. I'm sorry, ma'am." Maggie did not invite him in. She did not send him away either. She said, "All right, Mr. Redfern, thank you for saying so." She closed the door. Janelle Ruiz left the assessor's office in July, under protection of the state's whistleblower statute. Was hired 6 weeks later by the Ohio Auditor of State's office in Columbus at a raise of $14,000. Sent Maggie a card every Christmas thereafter. When people asked Maggie afterward, in the newspaper interview she agreed to give, and the one television interview she did not, whether she had known all along that they would fall this way, she always answered the same. She said no. She said she had only known that Ray had told her to watch. She said the falling was theirs. In September, Maggie met with the Appalachian Ohio Alliance, a regional land trust, and worked out a permanent conservation easement on the 65 acres. The water rights were legally locked. The land could never be drilled again, never be developed, never be flipped. She retained ownership. She paid the modest annual stewardship fee out of Ray's pension. The paperwork was filed on October 18th, with $18,000 of the Blue Line forfeiture that came back to her as restitution. Marsh's shell company dissolved by court order and its remaining assets liquidated. Maggie established the Raymond Halloway 4-H Scholarship at Athens County. $2,000 a year to a rural high school senior going into agricultural science, forestry, or environmental studies. The first recipient was announced the following spring. A 17-year-old boy from Trimble, whose grandmother had been one of Blue Line's targets. In the spring after that, Maggie asked a carpenter she knew in Chauncey, a man who had done work for Ray 20 years earlier, to build a simple oak bench and set it on the ridge above the drill site, which was now a small dry hole in the ground that Maggie had filled with river rock, and planted a redbud tree beside. A brass plate on the back of the bench, engraved in the small, careful handwriting of the same shop that had done Ray's headstone. Ray Halloway, 1952 to 2023. He loved this ground. He paid for it. Millfield did not, at first, know what to do with Maggie Halloway. For 6 weeks after the arrests, some people crossed the street when they saw her at the post office. Kimmy at the diner did not meet her eye. Then a piece ran in the Columbus Dispatch and another in the Athens News, both of them making clear how many other widows Maggie's evidence had protected. And the town, slowly, in the way small towns turned. By Thanksgiving, Kimmy hugged her at the register and said, "I'm sorry, Maggie." Maggie said, "I know, honey. It's all right." Buster lived another year and a half. He died on the porch of the farmhouse on Elm Street, in his sleep, on a warm afternoon in June. Maggie buried him at the base of the redbud on the ridge, where the bench is, where Ray had been mending the fence the day he did not come home. It is late October again. The sky is one flat sheet of pewter, and the sycamores have already given up their leaves. On County Road 14, 7 miles northwest of Millfield, a woman in a dark blue quilted vest stands at a wooden gate. Her hair is long and grey and pulled back. In her hand a clipboard. On the clipboard, one page. On the page, in her small, careful handwriting, a list of the trees she has planted along the ridge this year. 32 oaks, 11 maples, a stand of pawpaw at the pond, 1 redbud beside the bench. The for sale by owner sign is gone. In its place, on the same wooden stake, a new sign, smaller, also hand-lettered, also read, Halloway Preserve, 65 acres, protected in perpetuity. She stands there a long time, long enough for the light to change, long enough for a red-tailed hawk to lift out of the tulip poplar where camera 6 used to be, and to turn once over the barn and drift east. She writes one more line on her clipboard, at the bottom of the page, under the list of the trees. She writes it in the same hand that filled out the 3 columns for a year. What she writes is not for anyone but Ray. She writes, They came, Raymond. I watched what they did. I did it right. She caps her pen. She tucks the clipboard under her arm. She turns from the gate and walks back up the 2-track toward the ridge. And the light behind her is the color of pewter, and the barn behind her still leans. And the 65 acres behind her, every inch of them, above ground and below, belong to no one now who could ever sell them again.